Hello, my friends. I am Alicia. Welcome to the Faith Unraveled podcast, where we talk about starting the next chapter of life after a faith crisis. In today's very special episode, I will be interviewing my partner, Jamie, as he discusses his experience being raised as a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the very surprising details of Bishop's worthiness interviews, which held him back a year from his mission, and his experience of having a faith crisis that he kept quiet for 11 years of our marriage, which is very difficult to do whilst participating in bishopric and ward council meetings. Jamie was a participant in the Mormon and Gays focus group of Southern California and shares some sad details in that arena, as well as the experience he had on his mission when a trans woman that was visiting the ward was asked to leave the building. I hope you find comfort and inspiration in today's interview. Why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about your life in the church? If you had to just give a high-level overview of what your experience as an adult was in the church, what did that look like?
Yeah, so I was born in the church. My parents were converts. Before my faith deconstruction, I had many callings. I was in as a ward clerk, as a executive secretary, ward clerk for 9 years, and executive secretary for 2 years. So that means I was in bishopric meetings for at least 11 years. I had 4 different bishops during that period of time. So I got to see how different bishops operated the ward. I also was elders quorum president during that period of time for 2-3 years, I think it was. So I was in ward council for 15 years. And so out of the 22 years, I had been in ward council for 15, 16 years.
And I think the reason that the context is so important here, you mentioned that it's like a job, is that the entire Mormon church, aside from the Q15, the general authorities at the very, very top, it's all voluntarily run by the members of the church. And there's a lot involved. It's not just like a Sunday mass. You have sacrament meeting, you have Sunday school lessons, you have an entire youth program.
3-hour churches back in the day. It switched to 2-hour churches, but you also have to work, like my whole Sundays, I was gone.
Yeah, because every church congregation, which is called a ward, is run by what's called a bishopric. And those are the leaders, the men that lead that church congregation. And so being part of that, as you were, they have meetings, all kinds of meetings, bishopric meeting, ward council meetings. So it takes up a lot of time.
Yeah, a lot of time. A lot of time is dedicated to the church. Weekends, weekdays, a number of activities go on throughout the week. And so we were very involved as a family since we first got married. What was interesting about it is during a certain period of time, I began to experience a faith crisis and see materials that I struggled with. And so this is in 2008 period of time. So my full deconstruction happened in 2020. So there was 12 years where I was really struggling internally with the church.
Even going through all those callings.
Matter of fact, I had ward clerk, executive secretary, and I had elders quorum president during that period of time. But the difference, though, is when I hit in 2008 some of this stuff, I still had a testimony of certain things, like what you'll find is the Book of Mormon. I still had a testimony to, and Joseph Smith, I still had a testimony, but I lost some other things around it, like the temple was one of them. I found out a lot about the Masons in the temple. And so my temple attendance started to wane significantly in the 2008 timeframe. We also had Prop 8, and I struggled significantly with Prop 8 because I believe that everybody should have the right to be married, a man and a man, or a man and a woman, or a woman and a woman. I don't think that there should be any limitations on that. So when the church started to advocate against marriage, I struggled significantly in it. And then that just began some other things that I had, but I still continue to go to church. If we were to rate, we were talking about rating.
Yeah. So if you had to rate yourself between a 1 and a 10 in your Mormon married life, where were you?
So when we first got married, I would say I was an 8 out of 10. Once I hit the Masons in the Temple in the Book of Abraham, and this is in 2008, I became probably a 5 and maybe a 6 at times, depending upon what I was doing. And the one thing about me is I'm big on like being loyal and obedient. And so even though I might have not believed in some of this stuff, I still wanted to be obedient and to show that I still can do it. Not a lot of people knew about this. I think you were probably maybe 2 people knew about what I encountered in 2008, but I left it on the shelf, as some people would say. I buried it deep inside me.
What's interesting for me looking back on your story is that you were sufficiently going through the motions. You were doing like what you considered the necessary components of being a member of the church. We went to stake conference, all of our Sunday meetings. We never took like a Sunday off.
We took one Sunday off.
And that is an interesting story, because now I know that you had started your deconstruction process and had just kind of pleaded with me to take a day off. And I was really upset about it.
So 2008, what had happened and what caused 2008 to happen was I wanted to learn more about the temple. And I had heard about the Masons in the temple, and I heard about the Masons being Solomon's temple builders. Everything's now on the internet. And so as you just do some simple Google searching, you find out that the Masons began like in the 1600s. They weren't Solomon's temple builders. And that the temple itself, the ceremonies that we did, were exactly a copy of a lot of what the Masons did in their rituals. And so I struggled significantly. Like, we had taken a man-made type of thing and brought them into the temple, and we were doing these salvation ordinances with it. And that started my first like major crack that I had. And I changed. Personally, I struggled internally. And that's where I went to you and like, hey, I think we need to take a family getaway on a weekend. A day off. We had been going to church every day unless we were sick, right? Unless we were sick. And I'm like, let's just take the family to Legoland. Because internally, I started really struggling with just the church in general.
Did you think to yourself at any point, if they've lied about something as big as the temple ordinances, what else could they be lying about?
Well, that's where it went into the Book of Abraham. Like, I started hearing things that the scrolls, and so a little bit about the Book of Abraham is Joseph Smith translated these ancient Egyptian scrolls
that he bought from someone. From
someone.
A traveler.
Yeah. And they were about Abraham and how Abraham lived in Egypt.
Or so he said.
Or Israel.
This is Joseph Smith's claim that the Book of Abraham is, or that these ancient, which ended up being Egyptian funerary scrolls, which he claimed were lost scripture that he was going to now translate.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of apologetics around this point that really don't get you anywhere, except that it was just his imagination. He came up with this. Some people say that it was inspiration, but it certainly was not a translation.
It was not a translation. And you find out real quick that they were funeral scrolls. And so then you start questioning everything. Like, you start questioning, like, how many of this have I been taught? We've been taught for many years. Like, I found this out. So this was 2008. I would have been 35 at the time, right? So I found this out when I was 35 years. For 35 years, I had been taught that these were translated scrolls that Abraham had on them, and they weren't even close to that. So you start then, like, your mind starts going into other things and saying, oh my goodness, am I being taught? Is this all full of shit? That's kind of where I was going with my mind at that time. And you saw a significant change in me at that point in time. And you took me to the bishop because I had started like majorly changing. And I think internally what I was going through is I was going through a rough time. I was starting to go into the dark night of the soul at that point in time.
And I thought you were having an affair.
You did. You thought I was having an affair. we go to the bishop, right? And we sit down and you're like, you're the one that scheduled the meeting. I didn't schedule it. You scheduled it.
I'm kind of famous for that.
And then you said, I don't know what's going on. He's just acting way different. And I think he's having an affair. And so you, Bishop, you and him just need to talk and I'll step out. That's how that went, right?
I don't think I said I think he's having an affair because I think a bigger part of me just thought you were a porn addict, a closet
really?
porn addict.
What's interesting too is I really didn't watch porn at all. Like I watched porn when I was in high school with a bunch of friends, and that was
With a bunch of friends.
yeah, that was my seriously, like that was my.
You can't really get into it that much when you're with a group of friends.
Yeah. But it's just funny that you would think that when it wasn't even.
I just didn't have any context for understanding what this could possibly be. Okay, so you first talked about the temple rituals, which you discovered. Then the Book of Abraham.
Yes.
Was it the priesthood restoration next? What was the next one?
So that's where I stopped because I came to you in the shower, right? So we take.
Oh, no, you missed one.
Did I miss one?
Yeah.
Which one did I miss?
Polygamy.
Oh, I had always had a little bit of a hard time with polygamy, even from my missionary days and learning about it.
But you knew about it.
But the way that we were taught about polygamy is that you had these men back in the day that would die, like they were going on the Mormon battalion or they'd go on missions and they would die and they would leave these wonderful ladies and they didn't own their own property at the time. And so guess what? You needed a man there to help them out and marry them so that they can own their own property and have a life, right? That's how we were taught. And polygamy, I bought into it to a certain extent. I knew you weren't fully bought into it. And so when I started going in the rabbit hole, I would throw that out there just to get you to think critically outside of the box.
Yeah. And there was one time in particular that you said to me, so in the next life, if I'm righteous enough, we will have multiple wives in our family. Isn't that right? And now I realize that you were challenging me, but you were challenging my thoughts around the church. And it worked to a degree because I literally said, don't go there. To which you responded, well, do you not believe that? Because that's doctrinal. And I responded, nope, I don't believe that's doctrine.
She did.
I think that Joseph Smith was fallible. And I think that was his human desire. And I was in the camp of Joseph Smith must have been on the wrong path. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died. The Lord must have taken him because he wasn't on the right path.
But this came after, like that conversation with polygamy came after. We take showers together, right? In the morning. And so we were in the shower like a little bit afterwards from the faith crisis. And I said to you, it's like, I think I just mentioned like, I'm struggling here with the church and like what the church is with me and being a salvation and going to the church and being like who I am. And I started talking to you about some of the issues I was running into. And do you remember what you said to me?
Yeah, I really doubled down.
Yeah.
I felt at that time that marriage wasn't easy for us. And that the church was the one thing holding us together. And what we're going to talk about as we get into our deconstruction series is the reality that the church was actually a wedge in our relationship. And once we got rid of that wedge, we became so close because there was nothing standing between us. To answer your question, I do remember that what I said to you was our marriage wouldn't survive you leaving the church, just FYI. So if you want to play with this, just know you're playing with fire.
Yes. And me, I have always appreciated the relationship that we've had. And so I backed off from that point in time. I realized really quickly that this could have gone into a situation to where we might have separated if I continued down this road. And this relationship was more important to me than learning about the truth about the church.
I even remember that drive that we had up to the Central Coast. We were fighting, and that fight turned into this great discussion that I thought where I explained to you that my desire for physical intimacy was directly correlated with how well you priesthooded in our house.
You're right.
Like the better priesthood holder you are, the better sex you're going to have.
There is that. That is true. But because that's part of your journey too. Like if we go into your deconstruction, which everybody will hear, a lot of what you encountered in the past kind of drove the way that you were responding in that situation. So
I equated a good man with a man who holds his priesthood righteously.
Yeah. And you had started seeing me waver. And so I think there was a lot of nervousness around me wavering at that point in time. And part of me throwing out the polygamy thing on you was to get you to think critically and to get closer to where I was. And again, when I say where I was, it wasn't like throwing the church away. I still believed in the church. It's just I wanted you to be less scrupulous.
Yeah. Now, do you mind if we get into some of the stuff that you went through growing up? Like
Sure.
You talked about your parents were converts and they were really devout as a result of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you just tell us quickly the Sunday stations? Because I think it illustrates perfectly like what kind of household you grew up in.
Yeah.
What are Sunday stations?
Let me take a step back and just give a little bit of background around my two parents so that you understand how Sunday stations came about. Both my parents were not members of the church when they grew up. They became members of the church when they were single in their like early 20s. And so they had never gone through primary or learned all the doctrines of the church. So as they got married, I think they were only baptized and members for a couple years before they got married. And so they're pretty brand new themselves in the church when they had me. I'm the oldest of four kids. And as we grew up, they were just trying to learn how to like parent kids in this construct of Mormonism, right? And so what I felt is they probably tipped more on the stricter side of Mormonism. So like we didn't grow up drinking caffeine at all.
Or playing cards.
We didn't have a card deck in the house. And so Sunday stations, as Alicia talked about, on Sundays, we'd go to 3 hours of church and then come home. And then I'd have 2 more hours at these Sunday stations, half an hour at each station. So we do a half an hour of scripture reading, half an hour of genealogy, a half an hour of, it would be different things within the church that we do that journal writing was one. And then I forget the last one that we went in. So 3 hours of learning church and then 2 more hours on top of that with these Sunday stations. I think it only lasted like a few years in my life. That was like middle school, maybe beginning of high school years.
And just in defense of your mom, I remember what it was like raising kids and wanting so badly for them to have a love for the gospel, because you really equate that to whether you're going to be together in the next life. And if your kids aren't righteously living the gospel, you might not be together in the next life. So you're literally doing all of this because you love them so much. And the more you love your child, the more you want them to live righteously. Yeah. We would have had Sunday stations if someone hadn't put the veto on that.
That's probably right. Oh,
I asked you for it. No.
Yeah.
Do you want to make the kids hate church? I'm like, oh, maybe not. Okay, so let's now get into teenage years. You go through high school, you have kind of a little rebellion here and there, not too bad, but you get to college, planning on going on a mission, right? Yeah. And you meet a girl, and what happens?
Let me step back just to my teenage years. Like, I had grown up in California, and I really didn't have a lot of Mormon guy friends. All my friends that were girls were pretty much Mormon, or a good portion of them were Mormon, but all my guy friends were not Mormon. And I wouldn't say I was very like dedicated to the church during my high school years at all. And matter of fact, I probably questioned whether or not I was going to be Mormon during that period of time, just because internally, I think I struggled with the church at that point in time.
Were you blessing the sacrament still?
I was blessing the sacrament. And matter of fact, I started drinking in high school and doing some cannabis use during high school years. and I was still blessing the sacrament. And I think there came a point in time where every single one of the kids up there blessing the sacrament was not worthy to bless the sacrament, which was interesting. Like when I say not worthy, like if we drink, that's breaking the word of wisdom. We need to go in and talk to the bishop.
Oh yeah, the Mormon Church loves the topic of worthiness.
If you're not worthy, you shouldn't be blessing the sacrament. That's what they said. And so if you're having sex with your girlfriend, you shouldn't be blessing the sacrament. So you have to go through a repentance process.
It's all around sexual purity and substance use.
Yes.
Those are the two things that disqualify you from being worthy.
Yeah, you're spot on there.
I've never talked to anyone who was like in a fight at school that wasn't allowed to bless the sacrament. So I don't know. Maybe that's when
I've never seen
some
it.
areas. I've never seen it either.
But yeah, I went to ASU. So again, my parents wanted me to go to BYU. I didn't get into BYU. I had a 3.6 GPA. I still don't know today why I didn't get in. But I did get in at ASU, and ASU had a big institute in Mesa. If you know Mormonism real well, you have Utah, you have Idaho, and you have Arizona. Those are your three main areas that have a high, dense population of Mormons. And so my parents wanted me to go to ASU because of the high Mormon population. And so I ended up getting a girlfriend, and we ended up making a mistake. Or now at the time it was a mistake.
But you had sexual relations.
I had sexual relations outside the bonds of marriage is what they would call it.
And what are the implications of having sex out of wedlock when you are someone who is thinking about going on a mission?
So the interesting thing about it is I lied to my bishop as I went into interviewing to go on my mission. So I turned my papers in while I was at ASU, and I was supposed to get a calling a few weeks later. And I had talked with the bishop, had lied to the bishop of what I was doing at ASU so I could get on a mission. Part of it too is like every boy is expected to get on a mission. It's not like, hey, it's a choice, you can do what you want. They'll say it's a choice. It's not a choice because every single one is going on. And let me ask you, who did you want to marry?
Yeah, I think the thing that people don't understand, because a lot of outside, like people who see my TikTok content about missionaries will say like, you don't have to go, it's voluntary. But the youth organization preps boys to go on missions. Girls can go on missions. And believe me, it's much more of a choice for girls. But for boys, they know that these girls at home who will be women when they get home are not going to date someone who hasn't been on a mission. And no possibility of getting married to a nice Mormon girl if you don't go on a mission.
Yeah. So I knew that the impact of not going on a mission would be disappointing my family, like my mom and dad being disappointed, right? My bishop who's at home, my bishop who was my basketball coach, he would be disappointed in me. The ward members would be disappointed in me. Like everybody, like you deal with the disappointment of everybody around you if you don't go on your
It's become
mission.
more common for boys not to go on missions.
Now,
we know a few people that are like totally devoted to the gospel.
Very different than
they got married right out of high school. Back then in 1993, if a devout family had a child that didn't go on their mission, it was like,
it could be a stain to the family, right?
Why didn't they go on a mission? What's going on with them? There's no way you wouldn't go on a mission unless you had a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the reason why I lied. Like going in there, knowing that I had issues and had drank like a few months prior to that. I think I did some cannabis too. When I was in college, I ended up getting a girlfriend and having sexual relationships with her. And I felt like I can't tell this because then I won't be able to go on a mission. Because at that point in time, they had changed. If you had sex, you had to wait a year before you go on a mission. So I'm like, okay, I need to get on a mission. This is not like
self-preservation.
Yeah, this is not going for me. If I stay where I'm at, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And so I'm like, I'm going, what's the big deal of lying? And we know tons of people who've lied, right? Like we've had conversations now with a bunch of people and they're like, yeah, we just lied about it. And I'm like, I tried that. Well, I get caught, right? We had a falling out with the girlfriend that I had, I think she went to her bishop, and her bishop then reported me. And
the thing I think is important to inject here for context is that being LDS, you have a membership record that follows you regardless of what ward you're in. Anytime you move, your records are moved with you. So if someone, say at ASU, had gone into their singles ward bishop and said, I had sex with my girlfriend, and then they moved to California.
Yeah, they would just contact your bishop.
Your bishop would probably know from that other bishop.
They would bring your bishop. They would probably go to you and say, hey, I think you need to talk to your bishop first. And so that they give you the opportunity to take the initiative and confess. If you didn't do it, then they would call the other bishop and say, hey, I just want to let you know this is the situation. Talking about confidentiality, like when you're talking about the most intimate times, that's being shared across everyone. And so for me, what had happened is I did have sexual relationships. I shouldn't have been going on my mission because of the worthiness rule, and you have to wait a year. I think because I stopped communication with this girl, I'm assuming she went to her bishop. Her bishop then realized that my papers were in and contacted my stake president or bishop. Someone contacted my stake president or bishop. And then all of a sudden I get a phone call saying, hey, I need to come into the office. And what's interesting, it was from my bishop that did that. And I had to then go into the bishop's office and explain everything. And not just like, hey, I just had sex. It's like, hey, did you have your clothes off? Yes. How many times did you like
Thrust.
Exactly.
What occurs to me now that everybody is talking about soaking is that
we soaked.
Not we.
Not we. No, with my girlfriend
because you're trying so hard not to have sex.
We justified it. We were like, in our mind, we're like, if we don't move, then we don't have sex, right?
And I wonder if we didn't know it was called soaking until literally last year when it became a viral TikTok discussion point. But it really does happen because these kids are like, okay, we've gone this far. We can't actually do the deed. So let's just like hang out here for a second because it feels so good, but heaven forbid, don't move. And so when you went into the bishop, they actually asked you questions about how many times it went in.
They asked, did I have oral sex? And I had to say yes. And then I had to explain the situation, multiple situations where we had oral sex with the bishop. Then they asked about sex, and then I had to explain how many times I did it, and then the situations I did it in, and the movements I did it in. It wasn't like very general. They wanted the details, and I would assume they were. So I'm going to give, because I love my bishop. He was an amazing person. I'm going to give him grace in that situation because I think he was trained that way. Like the same thing that happened to me is the same thing that happened to you, right?
Yeah.
So you have these 40, 50-year-old men talking to 16-year-old boys and girls about their sexual intimacy, which is so messed up, right? Like from a trauma standpoint, I'm embarrassed. I'm already embarrassed having to talk to an adult about my intimacy. Now I'm starting to feel like major guilt because I did it. And then I have shame because I'm not going on my mission. Guess what? Everybody in the ward thought my papers were in. They were all asking me, when are you going on your mission? When are you going on your mission? And I had to tell them, no, I'm not going on my mission. I'm going to have to wait a year. And guess what that automatically does? Oh, he has to wait a year. The only thing that would make him wait a year is he had sex. And so everybody in the ward, and like, if you're not a member, it's not a big deal. Having sex is not a big deal. But in the church, having sex before marriage is a huge deal.
Almost like a perversion.
Well,
like that's the level of shame that's associated with it. Is now it's on public display because everybody knows that you had to stay home from your mission.
Yeah.
And they know why. There's only one reason why.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, did your bishop ask you about climaxing?
They did about orgasm. Like, yeah, we talked about orgasming for sure.
Mine asked me if I enjoyed it.
I don't know. That's messed up. That's really fucked up.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like a 45-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl in a room by themselves.
I don't remember him asking about any enjoyment at all. just the details of what I did. But the interesting thing is I talked to that bishop. Guess what? I had to go meet with the stake president because I was an elder. An elder is the higher priesthood, and the person responsible for that is the stake president.
And you'd already been ordained.
Yeah, because I lied about before I got ordained. So they ordained me to that higher priesthood. There's two priesthoods. There's a Aaronic and a Melchizedek priesthood.
And you usually get that elder calling or elder ordination before you leave your mission.
And then I had to go and tell this exact same thing to the stake president. So I had to go talk to the bishop about it. And then I went to the stake president. And guess what happened in my that year period of time before I could go on my mission? I had a bishop change. So my bishop was no longer my bishop, and I got a new bishop in, and I asked the stake president, do I need it? He's like, yep. So guess what? I had to talk to 3 people about this. And so, yeah, I carry a lot of, like, if you wanted to see right when my faith deconstruction happened, and I was fucking angry about having to share that at that point in time.
Now, what I would love to know from you is, did you blame the church or did you blame yourself?
At that point in time, I blamed myself. And they even said, said, so it was 2 people that had sex, right? They said because I had the priesthood, I carried more responsibility, which I don't know, that I felt like I had let everybody down during that period of time. And then I had to go to church and I had to respond to people, and I could see it in their eyes. They're like, oh. Like,
because that's the question. When you are a Mormon boy and you're 18 or 19 years old, what are you doing next year? What do you think you're going to do?
Well,
and what that means is like, are you going on a mission?
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody asks. Like during that period of time, everybody asks. The other thing that happens too is you then start thinking, will any girl want me? Like I am now damaged goods. Would they want to marry someone who is not a virgin, right? So you had to go through that type of mindset. And so I started then double downing at that point in time. I was like, okay, I messed up big time. I need to be as good as possible. And then I started reading the scriptures, the Book of Mormon, the Bible. I read all about church history. Church's view of church history at that point in time, not the true church history at all. So I read Miracle for Forgiveness by Spencer W. Kimball. I read that was an interesting facial.
I was assigned to read that a couple times.
Yeah. So I doubled down big time before I went on a mission, and I was really prepared going on my mission. And I loved the 2 years that I served in Ohio. Did I still feel from an integrity standpoint something was off? Yes. Like I look back now and I put myself in that emotion, and I have never felt very comfortable living the doctrine of the church or the gospel of the church. But they always had taught you that the natural man is an enemy to God and will be forever. And so then automatically you're like, oh, that's my natural man telling me that I am an enemy to God. That's what that is. And so I discounted my own intuition during that period of time. Because if I probably listened to that, I would have been like, this is all fucking bullshit, and I'm leaving right now. That's how, like.
But you always blame it on yourself. You always blame it on the natural man.
Yep.
So Kara Nuance Ho talks about this. She was the first person that I ever heard talk about the conflict between compassion and orthodoxy, and that in high demand religion, you'll see this competition between orthodoxy and compassion. So in other words, in order to be truly orthodox, a lot of times people
less compassion.
So I wanted you to tell your story about the time on your mission that you felt really, truly challenged between orthodoxy and compassion. And it was with one of your investigators and bringing them to church, and what happened when you brought that investigator to church.
So I was in Springfield, Ohio at the time, and I don't remember, I think it has multiple words. And we had a Christmas program, and we were doing really good. We were baptizing, I think, the prior missionaries before I came in, they had baptized like 19 people, 17 people. They had baptized a number of people prior. So coming into the ward, we were having a lot of success, and we were in a lower income area where a lot of people were looking at something to change their lives. And one of the people that we had a friend that was transgender, and we had a Christmas party, and like every great missionary, we invited all of her friends. We went in there and said, invite your friends. And she ended up bringing a transgender woman to the party. This person ended up going into the female bathroom to go to the bathroom, and one of the men were following her around the whole entire time and found her going into the bathroom and then kicked her out of the church, which as a missionary frustrated me significantly. Like, how do you kick someone out of the church? If God was here, if there was Jesus here, that's the person he would be helping out. And you have just now thrown her outside of the church, which to me was devastating as a missionary. Then what happened is we went over to this lady's house who invited all of her friends, said, hey, I don't want to be part of a church that would segregate people from coming to church. Church is where Jesus is, and he would accept everyone. And so I remember, like, my next meeting they had stake mission presidents at the time, and we were meeting with a stake mission president with a bunch of missionaries. And we had, I think, 3 sets of missionaries. So I think there was a total of 6 of us there. And I had completely lost it in there. I brought this situation up, and I went off. Like, I totally lost all control. My anger got a hold of me, and I went after that ward pretty significantly to the stake mission president, calling them that they were not Christ-like at all. And the interesting thing about that, and I'm pretty sure that stake mission president called my mission president after that. So I had a mission president who's over us, stake mission president's over the stake and the missionary work in the stake. I was part of the mission, so he called my mission president, and the next transfer I was out of that area. And I'm pretty positive it was because of that situation that I had, and I went off on the ward and how they were not loving to someone that wanted to go to church. So, but that didn't crack my shelf at all.
Well, I just keep thinking about the flash forward to mormonandgay.com,
yeah.
mormonsandgays.com, mormonandgay.com. I can't remember the name,
So
but it was a project that the church put forward. But before they launched the website, because they were trying to do this to show everybody, it felt very performative to me, even when I was a member.
So
but they had a test group.
Is that performative altruism?
Performative altruism. Yeah, it's a great topic. We need a whole episode on performative altruism.
I think there's a lot in the church.
But you were chosen from our ward to go participate in this. Is it
Yeah.
It's a discussion group, right?
It's a focus group that they brought a bunch of different people to get their reaction about this. And
to me, it was basically to say, should we move forward with this Mormon and Gays thing? We're only going to do it if it feels good to the members, because there's no way they would have done it otherwise. And so they tested it out with these discussion groups in different stakes.
Yeah.
You were part of it. And every time I remember you coming home from that meeting where you guys were discussing Proposition 8, you were discussing gay family members and people that you loved, you would come home so frustrated from those meetings because you're said there's so much homophobia in those meetings.
Yeah. Well, Prop 8 was homophobia to its
unbelievable,
extreme extent in the church. But yeah, it was even the comments that were made. I struggled with people making comments, and Alicia has aunts that are gay. Aunt Patty and Aunt Kathy. We've been around since, 26 years? At least I've been around.
They're the best.
They're the best. And then I had 2 gay managers. And so I have a lot of
gay friends too.
Yeah. So this has always been probably another crack that I've had as part of that, and Prop 8 like ripped that crack open even further. And that was about the same time I was going through the Book of Abraham and the temple. So, but yeah, it's always been a very soft place in my heart. And it also became one of the reasons why I probably was open to listening to things that were contrary to the church, is because of I struggled with that. That's one of those integrity things I really struggled with.
That was the conflict between compassion and orthodoxy.
Yeah. But
the church is telling you marriage is only between a man and a woman, and gender is an eternal.
Yeah. I also flipped
feature.
The other way too. Like on my mission, when I left my mission, I didn't feel comfortable with the person I was. And I really struggled with the orthodoxy. I became so orthodox in my belief system that I felt like I lost who I was on my mission. And I was probably not the best person because I became so orthodox. I had a mission president who was in the military, one of my mission presidents, and he like enforced how important obedience was during that period of time. He talked about like, if I asked you to walk off a cliff, you guys should have enough trust into me where you would do that. That's how, indoctrinated or brainwashed we were during that period of time. And so orthodoxy became who I was. When I left my mission, I was like, I am not that person. I need to get away from that. And so the interesting time is when we met, I was still very strict in like doubling down in the church. When we first got married, I think I was more of a disappointment to you because I started like transitioning more into a nuanced type of view of the church and less dedicated. And where you were coming from is you wanted someone more dedicated in the church. And I had started to move away, and then 2008 hits, and then I even moved further away. So like I said, I was probably 10 out of 10 on my mission. Coming back home off my mission, I was probably an 8, 7.5, 2008 timeframe in the temples and the Prop 8 and the Book of Abraham. I had dropped down to probably a 5 or 6 at that point.
You were going through the motions.
Yeah.
You talked about this gradual evolution of your faith unraveling. Mm-hmm. And it started off with these different materials that you were finding.
So can I just talk about the marriage?
Yeah.
Just one quick second is when I found you and we started dating, I found a kindred soul, someone who had experienced very similar things that I had experienced. And also I felt at the time too, that you were very similar in the thought processes of not being so orthodox, right? Because that's looking at your family. They weren't full Orthodox, right? They were
fun Mormons.
They were fun Mormons. They were great Mormons. They were really great Mormons, but very different than where I had come from. And I really appreciated that when I first married you. And in that time of learning, dating, I found out like, you're not that different than your journey wasn't that much different than my journey.
We'd both been through that brutal repentance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's how the marriage started too. Like once we got married and went through the temple, like I do think there was a shift where I became less and less orthodox and you became more and more orthodox.
I would agree with that assessment. So,
which then it caused the wedge, right? It was one of the main reasons why we had the wedge.
As we move beyond our faith deconstruction story, we'll start in on certain topics for this deconstruction series. When we started to deconstruct, we realized how certain dimensions of our lives were ruled by the church and were destructive to our relationship.
Yeah, one of the things that we have talked about is like the church inserts itself in everything.
Yeah.
Everything. Inserts in the marriage, inserts in our thoughts, what we wear, what we do.
This whole Think Celestial campaign that the church is on right now, it's just another way for the church to insert itself in everything. You recognize abuse in your relationship, but we don't criticize. What do? Think celestial. Thinking and hoping for what's to come in the next life
Yeah.
at the expense
of
of
this life.
this life.
Yeah.
Ignoring abusive behavior.
Yeah.
Ignoring really problematic things because, well, in the next life, we don't even know if we're going to have a next life. Yeah. So let's talk about the moment of your loss of testimony, because I know your faith deconstruction took a lot of years and it was etching away at your shelf, a lot of issues that you were putting on the shelf. And even when I came to you after my abrupt 180-degree faith crisis moment,
so November,
and said, I don't believe the church is true anymore.
Yeah, November 5th, 2019. She came to me in the afternoon, came home from work, walking in, and she said, hey, I need to tell you something. You said, I no longer believe anymore. And I won't get into your faith deconstruction, but I'll talk about how that impacted me at that point in time. I felt relief. I felt a little bit of relief in it. A little bit scared, but a little bit relief. Relief meaning the orthodoxy and the scrupulousness was now moving away. Matter of fact, I didn't realize how far she went. Like she went from like 8 or 9 to a 0. She doesn't believe at all. This is like crazy.
Like I went into some pretty deep nihilism there for a few months.
Yeah. Well, you were on the bathroom floor crying a lot of times during that period of time. But like I felt relief because the relief was, hey, she's like getting to where I'm at. I didn't realize that she didn't believe at all anymore, but I felt like, okay, she's becoming more and more nuanced. Matter of fact, 2 weeks later, I think we went to Palm Springs together and the nuance came out and I'm like, who cares? Like word of wisdom, let's drink.
So fun. That was so fun.
We drank wine that day. I thought it was going to be grape juice.
We thought it was Kadem.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It was so bad. We might have to tell the story. I don't know where we should tell the other part of that story.
That's a great story.
Yeah, we'll hold it. But the funny thing about it was like you had now gone past me. And then I'm like, hey, you can't go to the bishop because you wanted to go to the bishop. I'm like, no, you can't go to the bishop yet. Let's have this conversation. Let's figure out where we were.
Don't tell the kids.
Don't tell the kids. Yeah. But I wasn't like, I didn't come at you hard. I was pretty.
Oh, you were awesome.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah, it'll be okay. We'll work through it.
You would say, I'm going to continue to go to church. You can do whatever works for you. Yeah. I want to take the kids to church. This is you saying it to me. I want to take the kids to church. Like you felt scared to walk away. I don't think we're going to leave the church. I mean, you're like, I'm not leaving the church.
Yeah. I thought I would just stay in. And I'd be one of those husbands that would just go to the church with their kids and their wife would be at home. That was my thought process. But I think you became sneaky at that point in time because you started doing deep diving. And as we were going to bed, you would turn on your phone, YouTube.
I can't find my headphones.
And she'd start listening to these things. She went through a year of polygamy and Mormon stories. And I think it was like middle of January period of time. I kept on hearing things that I'm like, what's this Fanny Auger? What's this Partridge Girls? Like, what? Multiple first visions? Priesthood wasn't in the Book of Commandment? I heard enough. I remember, and I'm like, I remember what it was. Is I went up to LA. I work in between San Diego and LA at times. And I was up in LA, coming back home on the train, listening to, or not doing listening. I started doing research into some of this stuff. So I'm like, I have to figure like what my wife's hearing. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And as I encountered this stuff and started seeing how bad it really was and started like proofing it with, okay, this is someone making stuff up. No, this is actually in the church's documents. I went into anger. I went into complete anger. I remember calling my bishop and just saying, I'm done. Here's my temple recommend, and I threw it in the trash. Funny things like, Jamie, it's been expired for 6 months. Because I wasn't like a temple attending person, right? Because of the 2008 timeframe. And so he kind of laughed at me when that happened. But then we started up like regular meetings with him for a few months. and talking through some of this stuff, which I appreciated. The bishop was one of my close friends, and I really appreciated him doing it. But there came a point in time I had realized that the glass had shattered, and there's no matter what, you're not going to be able to pull those pieces back together. And my testimony was no longer, and whatever I had wasn't going to come back the way it was. And my year, like you were crying for 3 or 4 months, I wanted to punch a hole through the wall because I felt like I had made these decisions based upon something that was false. And I had converted and baptized people on this idea of truth, like absolute truth. The church believes in absolute truth. It wasn't true. None of it. Like every single pillar, the priesthood, like it's a made up story. First vision, Lucy Mack Smith even said that the first vision was very different. And that's his mom. He would go and talk to his mom about that. So what the church provides as what is the first vision is very different than what Lucy Mack said. So every single thing, like I already had the temples, already had the book of Abraham, the book of Mormon came really quick after that too. Like it was very easy when they're taking the golden plates, which we thought was translated. Like we have pictures of the golden plates on the desk, Joseph Smith opening up to him, translating with these spectacles on it to someone on the other side of a sheet so that they can translate. No, that's not how it was. He stuck his fucking head in a hat, put the plates on the mantle, and was just reading out of that. And then it's like all that. I felt very deceived by the church. I was very mad at the corporation of the church for how much they lied. And they knew all this. That's what I didn't understand. You knew all of this and you made a decision not to share it. You held me accountable. You held me to where I couldn't serve my mission. I had to be embarrassed by everybody else. And you couldn't be honest with me. So I was mad. I was mad for about a year. And it took me reading a few books. I read Bridges, and that's how I got through the anger through that.
David Ostler is a bishop or has been a bishop, and he wrote this book called Bridges, which is basically to explain the faith crisis experience to people who are Orthodox Mormon. And it's basically a book to build a bridge to help people who are going through a faith crisis.
Yeah.
By way of helping their relatives and loved ones understand what they're going through. So I think that book gave a lot of validation. I just want to give a huge shout out to David Ostler for that. That book for Orthodox family and friends that will read it. Not everybody will read it because they're afraid it's going to hurt their testimony. I don't think they understand. It is a book for active believing members. It is not meant to hurt your faith.
No.
And
it's supposed to explain why we go through why I went through the journey and help those people who are ministering to me, like be empathetic and understand.
And not only did our bishop read it, if I remember correctly, didn't he give the book to other people?
Well, no,
in
he gave
Word?
It to me. Like he read it first and he gave it to me, and then I read it.
Oh, that's how you got it?
And then we talked about the book. And that was the last time I had a conversation with him. We talked about the book, and I'll just leave it as that. Is we left it as
living in California. I think we have a different experience with church leaders, with leadership. We've had some truly compassionate bishops and stake presidents. Like really, truly, I feel like those are really good guys.
Yeah. The other thing that I think was very difficult in this situation was but I was angry. Like I told you, I was angry. I was hiking up a hill. It's the communication to my family. At some point in time, I knew I had to communicate to my family, and I communicated in a angry state. I had shared.
Do you mind if I tell that story?
Yeah, you can share that story.
So we're on a group text, and we've got everybody in the families on this group text. We have a couple different group texts with different people, but this is like our whole family. And so Jamie writes a text that basically just said, I no longer believe the church is true. I need to let you know because we're going to be stepping away from the church. Just so you're aware, we have not shared this with our kids, so we would really appreciate it if you could just keep it between us for right now until we figure out how to do that. To which his sister replies, Should we start a new text thread without all the kids?
I wasn't planning on sharing it with the kids.
So the
right then.
Band-Aid came off real quick right there. We just figured out how to tell them.
Maddie was on it, which is our oldest daughter, and David was on it, which is our middle son. And they found out at that point in time that we no longer, or I don't know if it was both of us. Definitely they knew that I had no longer.
I still remember the look on David's face when he came down the hall. He comes down, he's like...
I was going up the mountain. So we have a mountain right behind our house, and I was hiking up the mountain, and I was so pissed. Like I said,
we were hiking a lot at that time.
Exactly. I was getting my anger out. And as I was like going through my mind and you're spinning into all this, I'm like, I'm just going to let it go. And I shared it on the text, not seeing who was all on, because we had multiple text threads. We had text threads with just the adults in the family group, and we had some with the kids. And I grabbed the wrong text thread there and sent it out. And so that's how my son and my daughter found out about where I was at with the church. But I felt like I was a disappointment to everyone. That's like how I felt. And so I was very tender, but based upon the responses. And I would say some of my family members didn't respond that well, which then set me through the roof, because I feel like I'm following my integrity. Like Joseph Smith, and this is how bad it was. Like Joseph Smith had an affair with a 16-year-old girl, having sex behind his wife's back. Had no clue. His wife finds out about it, kicks the girl out. Another one was, there was two sisters that he would then go to one room and marry one girl, marry the other, them both not knowing about it and having sex with both of them. There was another one where Brigham Young took the person's family, like the woman's family. The guy had multiple kids, and Brigham Young said, nope, that's not your wife. That's my wife. You can go find someone else. Like the idea of family was always a core central component of the Mormon Church. But the original like origins of it was not about family. It was pretty much a fucking sex cult. That's what it was. It was about having sex with a bunch of young girls.
There's no juxtaposition like being inside a religion and being an active, believing, devout member versus leaving the church. And this is a prime example. You always, when you're in the church, view people who left as like they were deceived, or they're not making a good choice. Like that's the top one. People who are leaving the church are making the worst decision they ever possibly could. Like there is no doubt in your mind that they're under the influence of Satan. And when you do come to this moment of realization about your church history not being true, about the church being terribly oppressive to many groups within the church, being the cause arguably of a suicide epidemic among children, LGBTQIA plus children, you are stepping away in the name of integrity.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so having everybody disappointed about you because you're following your own integrity, you're following what you've been taught since you were a little kid. That's the hard thing about it. You're following all the principles that you've been ingrained with and brainwashed since you were like born.
One of my good friends who is from the most Orthodox family you could imagine. They were like the word royalty kind of situation. I hate that term, but just to paint the picture. And she deconstructed. She and I were young women's presidents at the same time. And she said to me, literally, Alicia, I feel like I followed Jesus right out of this church.
No, that's totally true. That's totally true. And so you go on and be in a disappointment to everyone. And you then have to learn how to deal with that disappointment, right? And for me, I'm sure my family will end up seeing this at some point in time. I had to take space for a certain period of time. And there's some I continue to take space from. And maybe eventually it will open up and have conversations. But I struggle with now. And so we're talking, this happened in 2020, January 2020. We're in 2020, end of 2023, November timeframe. But I've needed that time to heal for those 45 years prior within the church. And part of that is the healing deals with what are my new value systems? Where do I go from everything that I had been taught? Do I throw everything away? Do I keep some of that? What happens with our relationship? You've already heard the end of not the end of the story, but our relationship became a lot better, more authentic. We are able to communicate to each other. We don't have this toxic positivity going on with each other. With my kids, because our relationship becomes better, and now we're open to whatever they are. Just be who you want to be. They're now like more open to us, and I think we have a stronger family together than we did when we were in the church, because we're all very authentic and transparent with one another. And then there's no disappointment. Like if someone drinks, there's no disappointment there. So you're not dealing with disappointment. If our daughter decides to live with her boyfriend, we're not disappointed about that. Matter of fact, we're cheering that. So I think overall, the faith deconstruction was a benefit for me individually, me from a relationship standpoint, and me from a family standpoint. And I would say that I probably have a better view on life. And so my connections with others in my community and within my tribe, within my work, whatever, is probably better because I am more like open to a lot of things, where the church constrains you in the box and it really closes you down. It closes you down on relationships outside of the church. It closes you down on relationships with your wife because you have the patriarchy, and we'll talk about that and how that.
I'm excited about that episode. We're going to talk about patriarchy, breaking down patriarchy, which is a great podcast to listen to if you are deconstructing, breaking down patriarchy. But that is a really huge component to the improvement of our marriage dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I know that other people deconstruct and sometimes find that they're not compatible anymore. And I think that's a valid path. I feel super lucky that I'm in a relationship that we ended up more compatible than we were when we first got married. We are more compatible now than we've ever been before. Yeah. And I think that ultimately it comes down to not having this lens that clouds your vision of life.
But I want to emphasize your point that because you are like pushed into being this person that is what the church wants you to be, when you step outside of that, that person can be very different than the person that was in that box. And so I do feel lucky that when we stepped outside and we started becoming our own person, that we are still have compatibility, because there's a really good chance, or very high chance, that you're not compatible because the church forces it. You had stated one time, it's like being in an arranged marriage. And when you're getting married, you're getting married at 18 and 22. Like who out there gets married at 18 and 22? Why are you getting married? Because you can't have sex. Like you start dating each other.
Usually that's the case.
And you can't have sex. And the only way you can have sex is being married. And so guess what? We get married very young to have sex. And it's normally the first person that you want to have sex with, right? So you're forcing a relationship between two people that they barely know each other, and they're getting married because they want to have sex.
Yeah, true. Oh, that's going to lead into some really great episodes we're going to talk about. Guys, thanks so much for joining us for this episode where we got to dig into Jamie's history. And coming up, we're going to have a whole series on deconstruction. We're going to talk about the awakening, the unraveling, the process of burning it all down, the reconstruction, the healing. This discussion that we want here has nothing to do with finding out what's right or wrong. It's really a journey of exploration. We're still in the middle of it, and we're excited to eventually have on some guests and maybe talk about some of these things. We're very curious about the journey with psychedelics and substance use. We're interested in inner child healing. We love books. We've read, how many books did you count we've read in the last 3 months?
15, I think it was. We have a book club between each other.
We started a book club. Yeah. Just between us.
Just between us.
It's been really an exciting journey. And I just want to say at the close here that the faith deconstruction process for us has been the greatest gift of our lives. So we're really excited to share it with you and to share this journey. Please tell us in the comments what you thought about this episode today, and please like and subscribe. We're so excited to be on this journey with you. See you next time.